The first rays of morning light filtered through gossamer curtains, and Theodora Winter found herself frozen in place. Heart thundering against her ribs, someone lay beside her in bed, their breathing soft and steady. The scent of lavender and something older like aged parchment filled her nostrils. She hadn't gone to sleep with company. She distinctly remembered locking her bedroom door, following the same nightly routine she'd maintained since inheriting her grandmother's sprawling Victorian mansion 3 months ago. Yet here she was sharing her bed with a stranger. Slowly, carefully, Theodora turned her head. Dark hair spilled across her spare pillow like ink framing a face she recognized all too well. Rosalind, the maid who had come with the house. Rosalind, who moved like a shadow through the halls, who seemed to appear exactly when needed and vanish just as quickly. Rosalind, who never spoke above a whisper and whose eyes held secrets older than the house itself. Theodora's attempt to slip quietly from the bed failed when her foot caught in the sheets. Rosalind's eyes snapped open, not gradually, not with the confusion of someone waking naturally, but with the sharp awareness of a predator. Those eyes weren't their usual dark brown, but an impossible shade of silver that seemed to glow in the dim morning light. "Miss Winter," Rosalind spoke, her voice carrying an echo that hadn't been there before. "Please don't be alarmed. Don't be alarmed." Theodora managed to keep her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I went to bed alone in a locked room. You'll have to do better than that." Rosalind sat up, her movements too fluid to be entirely human. The silver in her eyes swirled like mercury. "You were in danger last night. The wards around the house were breached. I had no choice but to implement more direct protection measures." Theodora's mind raced through the events of the previous evening, the strange shadows she'd seen dancing at the edge of her vision, the way the temperature had dropped suddenly, frost forming on her windows despite the warm autumn night, the whispers that had seemed to come from within the walls themselves. "What exactly are you?" Theodora asked, surprised by her own calm. Perhaps some part of her had always known there was something different about Rose, about this house, about her grandmother's insistence that she accept both in her will. "I am bound to this house and its rightful owner." "You," Rosalind replied, rising from the bed in one graceful motion, her uniform perfectly pressed despite having supposedly slept in it shifted like shadows around her. "Your grandmother understood the importance of maintaining certain protections. There are things in this world that hunger for power, Miss Winter, and your bloodline carries power in abundance." Theodora thought of her grandmother's final words to her: "The house will keep you safe, dear one, but you must keep the house in return." At the time, she attributed it to the ramblings of a dying woman. Now, watching Rosalind move around the room with otherworldly grace, those words took on new meaning. "The things that tried to breach the wards last night," Theodora began, following Rosalind with her eyes. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Yes." Rosalind paused at the window, her silhouette merging with the shadows cast by the rising sun. "But you needn't fear them. That's why I'm here, why I always been here through generations of your family. And sleeping in my bed." A smile curved Rosalind's lips, revealing teeth that seemed just a touch too sharp. "The closest physical proximity allows for the strongest protection. Dark forces are gathering, Miss Winter. They sense the power awakening in you, just as it awakened in your grandmother before you." Theodora rose from the bed, drawn to the window where Rosalind stood. Outside, the garden seemed different. Somehow the colors too vivid, the shadows too deep. "Tell me everything," she said, watching a rose bloom in impossible shades of blue. "I need to understand what I've inherited." "As you wish," Rosalind replied, turning to face her with those mercurial eyes. "But remember, Miss Winter, once you know, there's no unknowing. Once you see, there's no unseeing. Are you certain you're ready?" Theodora met that silver gaze without flinching. "Show me." The library stretched before Theodora like a cave of secrets, towering shelves disappearing into shadows that the morning light couldn't quite pierce. Rosalind moved between the stacks with practiced ease, pulling volumes that seemed to hum with their own energy. The books she selected weren't the leather-bound classics Theodora remembered from childhood visits. These came from hidden shelves that hadn't been visible before, their spines marked with symbols that shifted and changed when viewed directly. "Your grandmother maintained detailed records," Rosalind explained, setting an ancient tome on the massive oak table. Its cover was bound in something that wasn't quite leather, with a texture that reminded thee of snake scales the winter family has guarded this house for centuries, though few understood its true purpose. Theodora ran her fingers over the strange binding, feeling it warm beneath her touch. And what purpose is that? It's a nexus point, Rosalind replied, her silver eyes gleaming. A crossing between worlds. The veil between realities is thin here, which makes it both valuable and dangerous. Your bloodline has always had the ability to maintain the boundaries, to keep things in their proper places. As if in response to Rosalind's words, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling and drifted down like a falling leaf at coals into a raven that perched on the back of a nearby chair, its eyes glowing with the same mercurial light as Rosalind's. Benedict, Rosalind acknowledged the bird with a slight nod. What news? The raven tilted its head, and a voice that sounded like rustling pap-ers emerged from its beak. They're gathering in the old grove, the ones who failed to breach the wards last night. They brought a blood mage. Theodora watched the exchange with growing fascination and unease. A blood mage, a practitioner who draws power from sacrifice. Rosalind's expression darkened. They're desperate if they're willing to work with one blood. Magic leaves traces, makes them easier to track. The raven, Benedict rough his feathers. They speak of the awakening. They know she's coming into her power. Theodora felt a tingling sensation in her fingertips, and the book beneath her hands began to glow faintly. What power? I don't feel any different. Look at your reflection, Rosalind suggested, gesturing to a mirror hanging between two bookshelves. Theodora approached the mirror cautiously. At first, she saw only herself, the same face she'd known for 27 years, framed by unruly auburn hair. But as she watched, something shifted. Her green eyes began to shimmer with golden light, and faint lines of luminescence traced patterns beneath her skin like circuits on a motherboard. The power usually manifests fully at 28, Rosalind explained, coming to stand behind her. In the mirror, the maid's form seemed to flicker between human and something else, something with too many angles and eyes that contained galaxies. Your birthday is in 3 days, the autumn equinox, Theodora whispered, remembering how her grandmother had always made such a fuss about that particular date. Yes, when the boundaries between worlds are naturally weaker, it's why they're moving now, trying to breach the house's defenses before you come into your full strength. Benedict launched himself from the chair, landing on the table near the strange book. They're not the only ones watching. The council has sent observers. Rosen's lip curled slightly. The council can observe from a distance. They lost any right to interfere when they abandoned this house during the last incursion. The last incursion. Theodora turned from the mirror, the golden light fading from her eyes. What happened? Your grandmother's final battle, Rosalind said softly. She held the boundaries alone, while the council debated protocol. By the time they decided to act, she had already. The maid's voice trailed off, genuine grief flickering across her otherworldly features. Theodora remembered finding her grandmother in this very library, surrounded by scattered books and strange symbols burned into the floor. The official cause of death had been a heart attack, but now she wondered what really happened that night. You need to learn quickly, Rosalind continued, recovering her composure. The basics of wording, the names of power, the proper ways to maintain the boundaries. There's so much your grandmother wanted to teach you herself, but time grows short, and if I refuse? Theodora asked, though she already knew she wouldn't. If I walk away from all this, the power in your blood won't fade, Benedict answered. Before Rosalind could, it will draw them to you wherever you go. At least here you have the house's protection. And U.S. Theodora turned back to the book on the table, watching as the symbols on its cover rearranged themselves into words she could almost understand. Then teach me, show me everything I need to know. Rosalind placed a hand on her shoulder, and Theodora felt a current of energy pass between them. We begin now. First lesson: nothing in this house is quite what it seems, and everything follows rules, even if those rules aren't immediately apparent. As if to demonstrate this point, the library around them began to shift. Shelves move like living things, creating new passages and revealing hidden corners. The morning light took on a green tinge, and the air filled with the scent of old magic and possibility. Welcome, Rosalind said, her true form showing more clearly now, beautiful and terrible in its otherworldliness, to your inheritance. Miss Winter, the next 48 hours passed in a blur of ancient languages and impossible lessons. Theodora learned to see the ley lines that ran beneath the house, glowing rivers of power that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She discovered that every mirror in the mansion served as a potential doorway, and that the greenhouse contained plants from worlds that had never known an earthly sun. But it was the basement that held the greatest secrets. Mind your step, Rosalind cautioned as they descended the narrow stone staircase. The walls here were older than the house above, carved with symbols that moved like living things. The lower levels don't always maintain consistent geometry. As if to prove her point, the staircase suddenly spiraled in a way that defied physics, leaving Theodora's stomach lurching. When her vision cleared, they stood in a vast circular chamber that couldn't possibly fit beneath the house's foundation. Your grandmother called this the anchor room, Rosal explained, moving to the center where a complex pattern was etched into the stone floor. It's where the boundaries between worlds are thinnest and where they're most easily maintained or broken. Benedict swooped down from somewhere above, his wings stirring air that tasted of ozone and possibility. Movement in the grove. The blood mage has begun preparations. Theodora felt the weight of time pressing down on her. Less than 24 hours until the equinox, until her 28th birthday, until whatever powers sleeping in her blood fully awaken. Show me what I need to do, she said, stepping into the center of the pattern. The moment her feet touched the carved lines, they began to glow with that same golden light she'd seen in her eyes. Rosalind's form shifted more dramatically in this room, her human appearance falling away like water. What stood before Theodora now was a being of living shadow and starlight, with wings that seemed to be made of midnight and eyes that held entire universes. The first thing you must understand, Rosalind's voice echoed with harmonics that made the air vibrate, is that what you see isn't the full truth of things. Reality here is negotiable. To demonstrate, she reached out with a hand that was sometimes flesh and sometimes stardust, touching the air between them. Reality rippled like disturbed water, and suddenly Theodore could see them, the threads that held the world together, the spaces between spaces, the delicate barriers between dimensions that her family had been tasked with protecting. It's beautiful, she whispered, reaching out to touch one of the gleaming threads. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of power rushed through her body. Images flooded her mind, other worlds, other times, other possibilities. She saw creatures of light and shadow, beings that defied description, realms where the laws of physics were more like gentle suggestions. Careful, Rosalind cautioned, steadying her with a touch that sent sparks of electricity dancing across Theodora's skin. Too much exposure too quickly can be overwhelming, but Theodora barely heard her. Something else had caught her attention, a dark spot in the tapestry of reality, a place where the threads were fraying. There, she pointed. Something's wrong there. Benedict landed on a nearby pillar, his form growing larger, more corvid than Raven. The blood mids work. They're trying to create a tear. Why? Theodora asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Power, Rosen's voice held ancient sadness. Always power. Some believe that by breaking the boundaries, they can harness the energy that flows between worlds. They don't understand or don't care that doing so would destroy the delicate balance that keeps reality stable. A tremor ran through the chamber, and the fraying spot pulsed with sickly red light. Theodora felt it like a wound in her own flesh, a wrongness that made her newly awakening power recoil. They're starting early, Benedict's voice carried alarm. The equinox is still hours away. They're desperate. Rosaline moved to examine the weakening barrier, her wings casting ever-changing shadows. They know that once Miss Winter comes into her full power, their chance will be lost. Another tremor, stronger this time. Dust fell from the ceiling that wasn't really a ceiling, and the carved patterns beneath their feet flared with warning. Like Theodora felt something stir in her blood, a power older than the house, older than her family line. It rose up like a tide, golden light spilling from her skin. The threads of reality seemed to reach for her, recognizing something in her, that she was only beginning to understand herself. What's happening to me? She gasped as the power continued to build. Your awakening. Rosalind's many eyes widened. Its beginning early, the Bloodmid's attempts to breach the barriers must have triggered it. The chamber, filled with golden light as Theodora's power continued to surge, the threads of reality sang to her now, a symphony of cosmic forces that she somehow understood on a level deeper than conscious thought. But with that understanding came awareness of the danger they faced. The tear, she pointed to the weakening spot. If it fully opens, catastrophe, Benedict finished grimly. The barriers between worlds will collapse. Reality itself will unravel. Theodora took a deep breath, feeling the power pulse through her veins like liquid starlight. Then we don't let that happen. She stepped forward, raising her hands toward the fraying threads. Show me how to fix it. Rosalind moved to stand beside, her true form blazing with otherworldly energy. Together, then Miss Winter, let me show you how to rewrite the rules of reality itself. Golden light poured from Theodora's hands as she wove reality back together, guided by Rosalind's instruction. Each movement felt both foreign and familiar, as if her body remembered skills her mind had never learned. The fraying spot in the barrier pulsed with angry red energy, fighting against her attempts to repair it. They're pushing back. Benedict, worn from his perch, now grown to the size of a horse, his feathers gleaming with constellation patterns. The blood mage has begun the ritual in earnest. Theodora felt it, a dark tide rising against her power, trying to tear open what she sought to mend. Through the weakening barrier she caught glimpses of the grove beyond the house's boundaries. Hooded figures stood in a circle around a central figure whose hands dripped with something too dark to be natural blood. Focus. Rosalind's voice anchored her as reality rippled around them. Remember what I showed you. The threads want to be whole. Guide them, don't force them. Sweat bead on Theodora's forehead as she worked her newly awakened power, singing through her veins. The carved patterns beneath her feet blazed brighter, responding to her efforts. But for every tear she mended, the blood mage's ritual created two more. This isn't working fast enough, she gasped, feeling the strain of maintaining multiple repairs at once. We need to stow them at the source. Rosalind's galaxy-filled eyes narrowed. The grove is beyond the house's direct protection. If you go out there, they'll be waiting. Benedict finished, spreading his starlit wings. But she's right, we're fighting the symptoms, not the cause. Another surge of dark energy battered against the barriers, and Theodora felt it like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind, creatures waiting in the spaces between worlds, hungry things that would devour reality itself if given the chance. She saw what would happen if the blood mage exceeded the walls between worlds, dissolving chaos pouring through everything she knew and loved. Being unmade made my grandmother, she said, suddenly remembering something. The night she died, she went out to face them, didn't she? Rosalind's form flickered with what might have been grief. She did. The council had abandoned us, the barriers were failing, and she chose to take the fight to them. She succeeded in driving them back, but the price. Tell me what really happened to her. The chamber grew still. Even the glowing threads of reality seemed to pause in their dance. When Rosalind spoke again, her voice carried the weight of ancient sorrow. Your grandmother discovered that the barriers could be reinforced with a willing sacrifice, not of blood or life, but of something equally precious, one's connection to reality itself. She rode herself out of existence, became a living anchor for the boundaries between worlds. She's still here, in a way woven into the very fabric of this house's protection. Theodora's heart clenched. That's why there are no pictures of her anywhere. Why? I can remember she existed, but can't quite recall her face. Yes, and now the blood mage seeks to undo her sacrifice, to tear open what she gave everything to protect. Another tremor shook the chamber, stronger than before. Through the weakening barriers, Theodora could hear chanting words in a language that hurt her ears and made her teeth ache. The bloodmist power was growing. She straightened her spine. Decision made. Show me how to reach the grove. I won't let them destroy what she protected. Miss Winter, Rosalind's voice held warning. If you face them directly, there will be consequences. Power demands balance. Any action we take will have a price. Then we make them pay it instead of us, Theodora replied, feeling her power surge in response to her determination. The golden light around her intensified, and the threads of reality seemed to bend toward her like flowers following the sun. Benedict launched himself from his perch, landing beside her in a rush of starlit feathers. I will guide you through the shadows, but Rosalind must remain here, maintaining what barriers remain. Theodora turned to her otherworldly protector, the being who had watched over her family for generations and last. Lessons before I fed them. Rosalind's form shifted, becoming somehow both more and less solid. Remember, reality here is negotiable, but everything has rules. Find their pattern, and you can break it, but be careful of what pattern you create in its place. Drawing herself up, Theodora let her power flow freely, no longer fighting the strange new awareness that came with it. She could see them all now, the layers of reality, stacked like pages in a book, the currents of power flowing through the house, the echoes of her grandmother's sacrifice, still resonating through the barrier she died to protect. I'm ready, she said, though her heart thundered in her chest. Rosalind reached out with a hand made of starlight and shadow, touching Theodora's forehead. Knowledge poured into her mind. Symbols of power, words of unmaking, the true names of things that existed between realities. Now you are Rosalind said softly. Go. We'll hold what we can here. Benedict spread his wings, opening a path through shadow, and Theodora stepped forward to face whatever waited in the grove behind her. Rosalind's voice echoed one final warning. Remember, the greatest power isn't in unmaking reality, but in choosing which reality to make in its place. The grove was a wound in reality. Theodora saw it clearly now as she emerged from Benedict's shadow path, a place where the natural world had been corrupted by forces that should never have touched it. The trees bent at impossible angles, their branches reaching like grasping hands toward a sky that swirled with unnatural colors. The blood mage stood at the center of a circle of hooded figures, his hands raised toward the tear in reality that pulsed above them like a bleeding star. His face, when he turned to look at her, was a map of self-inflicted scars that glowed with sickly red light. The hair arrives, he said, his voice resonating with stolen power. How convenient. Your awakening will fuel the final breach. Theodora felt Benedict's presence at her back, his wings spread in a defensive arc. The golden light of her power illuminated the grove, pushing back against the crawling darkness that emanated from the blood mage's ritual. You don't understand what you're doing, she said, watching the threads of reality strain and snap around them. The barriers aren't meant to be broken. The blood mage laughed, and the sound made reality shiver. Understanding is overrated power. That's what matters. The power your family has forged for generations, the power your grandmother died to protect. My grandmother sacrificed everything to maintain the balance. Balance. He spat the word like a curse. There is no balance, there is only power, and those too weak to seize it. He gestured, and the hooded figures began to chant in that reality, vending language. The tear above them widened, and Theodora caught glimpses of what waited beyond, vast shapes that defied comprehension, beings of such alien geometry that looking at them made her mind recoil. The power in her blood surged in response, golden light pouring from her skin. She remembered Rosalind's words. Reality here is negotiable, but everything has rules. The blood mage ritual had rules too. She could see them now, patterns in the chanting, symmetries in the circle of cultists, equations written in blood and darkness. But there were flaws in his working, gaps where his understanding fell short. Theodora began to move her feet, tracing counter patterns through the corrupted earth. Golden light followed her steps, creating new geometries that intersected with the blood mage's dark ritual. What are you doing? He snarled, recognizing the threat. Too late. Rewriting your rules, she answered, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air sing. The knowledge Rosalind had given her flowed through her mind, showing her exactly where to step, what symbols to trace, how to turn the blood mage's power back on itself. Benedict launched himself skyward, his wings leaving trails of starlight. As he circled, the widening tire reality groaned around them, caught between competing horses. The blood mage raised his scared hands, dark power gathering. Like storm clouds, you cannot stop what's already begun. The barriers will fall. No, Theodora said quietly, they won't. She reached out, not toward the tear itself, but toward the memory of her grandmother's sacrifice, woven into the very fabric of this place. Golden light met that ancient working, and suddenly she understood what needed to be done. The blood attacked, hurling bolts of corrupted power, but Theodora was no longer where he aimed. She moved between moments, between heartbeats, her grandmother's knowledge guiding her steps. Each motion reinforced the barriers, each breath drew the tear closer to healing Benedict, she called. Now the star-wide raven dove through the tear, his feathers blazing with protective light. The creatures reaching through from beyond recoiled, their geometry disrupted by his passage. The blood mage screamed in rage and frustration. You don't have the strength to seal it. Even your grandmother couldn't close it without sacrificing herself. Theodora smiled, feeling the last pieces of understanding fall into place. She didn't fail. She showed me the way. She reached into the heart of her power, into the very essence of what made her a winter, and made her choice not a sacrifice of existence, like her grandmother, but a transformation, a willing change of state that would forever alter what she was. Golden light exploded outward as Theodora rewrote her own pattern, becoming something between human and guardian, between flesh and power. The barriers responded, recognizing her new nature, accepting her as both protector and protection. The blood mage's ritual shattered. His cultists fell, their dark power turned back upon them. The tear in reality sealed itself with a sound like a bell ringing backward through time. When the light faded, Theodora stood transformed. Her eyes held the same starlight as Rosalind's, her skin traced with patterns that matched the house's protective wards. She was still herself, but also something more, the living extension of the barriers, a guardian incarnate. The blood mage lay broken on the corrupted ground, his stolen power burned away. What are you? I am what my grandmother became. Theodora answered, her voice carrying echoes of power and possibility. But I found a different way. Balance doesn't require destruction, only transformation. Benedict landed beside her as reality settled into its new pattern. The grove began to heal, the corruption burning away under the touch of golden light above them. The sky cleared to reveal the first light of dawn. The house will need a new maid, Theodora mused, feeling Rosalind's approval radiating through the restored barriers. And you'll need a teacher, Benedict added. Your journey is just beginning. Theodora looked toward the house, her inheritance, her destiny. The sun rose over its peaked roof, and for a moment she thought she saw her grandmother's face in the pattern of light and shadow, smiling with pride and relief. Then let's begin, she said, stepping forward into her new reality.